We now begin our study of the minor prophets in the Old Testament, and we're going to start with the prophet Habakkuk. But first things first, and just to clear our facts about the people of God in the Old Testament. After King Solomon's death, there was unrest and civil war in Israel. And there was infighting between the 12 tribes that it caused a split between the 10 tribes that belong to the northern kingdom and the 2 tribes that belong to the southern kingdom. Now the 10 tribes were taken into captivity by the Assyrians, and the 10 tribes never returned to the promised land, and they assimilated into other nations and cultures. Whereas the 2 tribes of the southern kingdom, namely Judah and Benjamin, were taken captives by the Babylonians. And though many of them never returned back to the promised land of Palestine, the 2 tribes, or sources tell us that because Judah overshadowed Benjamin, it was Judah, the tribe of Judah, and many from the tribe of Judah who actually returned to Palestine from the Babylonian captivity. Now we will study more about the exiles and the deportations and the returns when we study the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. But coming back to the prophet Habakkuk, this minor prophet is one of, or if not the most interesting prophet amongst the minor prophets. Now, to start with, what is the meaning of the name Habakkuk? Now, the name Habakkuk means someone who embraces or hugs. Now, if we are to describe this in modern terms, then a clinger, somebody who clings to someone else. So this Habakkuk was a man who clung to God. And so he was a clinger. That's what his name Habakkuk means. Now this Habakkuk dared to argue with God. And as a clinger, he clung to God and he insisted on getting answers from God. But when God answered, he didn't like the answers that he got from God. Now, as we study this minor prophet Habakkuk, we deal with a very basic, important issue again, and that is the issue of the contradiction between faith over facts, or between the contradiction between facts and faith. Because sometimes what we believe doesn't look like the truth, because the facts seem to be against us, and particularly against us because if God is a good God and an all-powerful God, then why do the innocent people suffer and the guilty people don't suffer? Why doesn't God act more quickly? Why doesn't God do something about the mess that the world is in? 3 very relevant questions in our dealing with this important issue of the contradiction between faith and facts. Now today, in 2022, we are living in pandemic times, and the world seems to be in all kinds of a mess and chaos. And so in such a scenario, we are compelled to ask, why doesn't God do something about the mess that the world is in right now? Now, the good thing for us in this study is that this minor prophet Habakkuk, this prophetic book of Habakkuk, gives us answers to these all-important questions. Now, coming back to Habakkuk arguing with God and clinging to God and wrestling with God for answers. Many people in the world wrestle with these issues, wrestle with their problems. But they are either wrestling with themselves, they're churning the arguments in their own minds, or they are wrestling with other people and arguing with other people about the questions and the problems that they have. But when there is a big problem in our lives, the best way to deal with those problems is to wrestle with God and try to get the answers from God and cling to God until He gives us an answer, just like what Habakkuk did. And so his sheer boldness and confidence comes through. His boldness and his honesty comes through. And that is how significant this prophet Habakkuk is, though he's a little prophet. So he argues with God. Now, unlike the prophet Zephaniah, the prophetic book of Zephaniah, this prophetic book of Habakkuk is full of quotable quotes. And amongst the famous verses of Habakkuk is the most famous one, which has become the Magna Carta of the Protestant Reformation, which is, "The just shall live by faith." And it's found in chapter 2 and verse 4. And Martin Luther made this verse ring all across Europe. So, one of the reasons why this book is so interesting and why it is a liked prophetic book is because there are 3 verses that come to mind when we mention Habakkuk. One is this verse, "The just shall live by faith." The other is, "Though the fig tree may not blossom, and though there is no grape in the vine, and there are no sheep in the pen, sheep and cattle in the pen, yet I will rejoice in the Lord." And the third verse is, "Surely the vision will not tarry, it will come to pass." And if God has given you a vision, make it plain and write it down. So these verses, 3 verses namely, make this prophetic book of Habakkuk a very interesting and important book. But this verse, "The just shall live by faith," is a highly misunderstood and misinterpreted verse. And so we need to carefully look at what it says and what it means. Now, when we come back, we will look more at the book of Habakkuk and the structure of this book, dividing the 3 chapters into 2. Amen.